So the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs ended about a week ago, and there have been a lot of interesting debates and discussions going on with certain teams, and let's be honest, mostly the Leafs because Leafs. But one team that I think isn't getting talked about enough, where I think there should be a bigger discussion around, is the Pittsburgh Penguins. And this is a team that going into the playoffs was touted by a good amount of people as a dark horse for potentially being a Stanley Cup contender, myself included, because I had the Pittsburgh Penguins going to the Eastern Conference Final. And when they went up 3-1, I'm like, here we go. Series is done. Sidney Crosby has been playing fantastic. He's unstoppable right now. And then he got injured and was out in Game 6. Rangers were able to tie it. Then the Rangers came back and won. And it was a bit of a shocker. I wasn't necessarily expecting the Rangers to win that game. I felt that they did have the talent to win, but I just thought Pittsburgh would come out on top. Sidney Crosby would be back, team would be firing on all cylinders, and that's not what happened. So now with the team out of the playoffs, there's a lot of things that need to happen in Pittsburgh and a lot of tough conversations that need to happen, specifically about their core of Crosby, Malkin, and Letang. So in this video, we're going to talk about what could be next for the Pittsburgh Penguins and which direction could they be going in the offseason and what moves could be made to give us a little bit more of insight on what could be happening with the Penguins going forward. So we'll talk about that stuff and a little bit more. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Before we get started with the discussion, however, I'd just like to remind you guys to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you are new around here. Leaving likes on these videos really helps these videos perform better in the YouTube algorithm, helps this channel grow. So if you want to see this channel grow, make sure to leave a like, and again, subscribe if you are new around here so then you don't miss another video. So the big thing that needs to be talked about in Pittsburgh is about the three core players for the Pittsburgh Penguins and who's staying and who's going, because two of those guys are UFAs this summer, Malkin and Letang. And both of these guys are still key contributors, even though they are a bit older, both players being 35, and they said in their exit interviews that they still view themselves as having at least 3 or 4 more years left in the tank. Malkin said 3 or 4, Letang said 4 or 5, so we'll just say both of them feel that they have at least 3 seasons left in the NHL. So because both of them feel that they have some mileage left to use in the NHL, both of these guys are going to be looking for deals with term. And it was reported that the Penguins actually offered them both identical contracts at 3 years apiece for $5 million a season. And even I will tell you, despite the fact that Malkin and Letang are both 35 and have had problems with injuries recently, they are worth more than $5 million. And honestly, it's a bit of a slap in the face to what these players have given the Pittsburgh Penguins organization, along with Crosby. All 3 players have been around for the 3 Sidney Crosby-led Stanley Cup championships in Pittsburgh. They've been competitive every single year. Malkin, specifically, when Crosby was out, he would take over the helm and really be that main guy that if he wasn't in Pittsburgh, he would have been somewhere else. And Letang has just been a steady number 1 defenseman on that blue line for years at this point, and to give them both $5 million a season, it's a bit of a slap in the face, despite the fact that I think they have been getting overpaid recently. Malkin at $9.5 million and Letang at $7.25, I believe. So it sounds like contract negotiations with both Malkin and Letang are not going well right now. So now there is some debate about, will these guys be back in Pittsburgh next season? And it's still unknown. Looking at the Pittsburgh Penguins projected lineup and cap space and all that kind of stuff, they have about $24 million of cap space to play around with this offseason. It was $29 million, but they just recently re-signed Brian Rust, which we'll talk about in this video as well. But $24 million of cap space to use on filling multiple holes in their lineup, and I see some of those holes being a top 6 forward, maybe 2 top 6 forwards, because Evgeny Malkin is their second line center, or was their second line center. And if Chris Letang doesn't come back, then you have to fill that void with at least a top 4 defenseman. And then you also have the backup goaltender that you have to look at. So $24 million in cap space is actually quite a bit for them to use on their lineup. They just have to be smart with their money, and that'll start with their 2 main unrestricted free agents. And before, it was 3 main unrestricted free agents because I felt Brian Rust was a big piece of this team over the past few years, and I thought he was most likely going to walk away from the Penguins, but they gave him an extension. They gave him a 6-year deal at $5.125 million per season, and it's about the same kind of contract that I was expecting Brian Rust to get. I think he's been a key contributor for the Penguins, has been a very solid, consistent top 6 forward, top 6 winger for them, and I had thought that he would get a contract similar to Zach Hyman, and he pretty much got that, but the Penguins were willing to give it to him. So I was a little bit surprised at that, but you get another top 6 forward, you get a guy who's been in the organization for years at this point, and you don't have to worry about filling another top 6 forward spot. And going into this video, at least before the Brian Rust extension, I had been thinking about those 3 main UFAs and the fact that, in my opinion, they could only bring back 2 of them. They've already locked up 1 of them. That means, at least in my eyes, one of Malkin or Letang is gone. And if I were the Pittsburgh Penguins, I'm seeing more value in keeping Letang than there is in keeping Malkin. Let me explain. Losing Malkin would be big for the Pittsburgh Penguins. He's been a big piece of the offense for the Pittsburgh Penguins for years at this point, has been playing behind Sidney Crosby for years at this point. But I feel like the Penguins already have enough center depth in their organization that I think that they can fill the void, if not go out and find a second line center in free agency or in trades. Whereas losing Chris Letang, I think they're losing a big piece of their team that I don't know if they can fill the void of in the offseason here. Chris Letang, I think, just provides too many things that are so valuable to the Penguins blue line that I think you have to bring him back. Not at the $5 million price point. If I was the GM, I would give him a shorter term deal with more money. So maybe he makes the same amount of money that he did on his previous deal, but it's a 2-year extension, something like that. I think Malkin will look towards more opportunity in a different city, and because of that, I just really think Malkin will chase the money, and that's where I stand with Malkin. I think Malkin's gone. So now that'll leave you with a hole, or 2 holes possibly, in the top 6. How are you going to fill those voids? I think the Jeff Carter extension was definitely something to look at the trade deadline. He's not making a ton of money. He has a no movement clause on that contract. So I think Jeff Carter may be able to step up into that second line center spot, but kind of split the duties that Malkin had, or kind of try to fill the void that Malkin had with another player on their roster. And I think it would be a guy like Evan Rodriguez. Evan Rodriguez had a very solid season this year. He was a 20-goal scorer, and he was on a cheap deal, making $1 million. He's going to make more than that, but I do feel like Pittsburgh will look at bringing him back. I see something like a 3-year deal at $3 million. Something like that could work. And then I think they still need to bring in a top 6 forward, and that's why, looking at the market, maybe you look at bringing back Rickard Rakell. There has been interest from the Penguins about bringing back Rickard Rakell, and I think there's value in that. He's still a young forward. He can play the wing. He has played center before, from what I know, but I think he's a better winger. You could probably get him locked up to a 4 or 5 year deal at about $4.5 million. Shouldn't be a big deal about getting him locked up. Or maybe you don't lock up Rakell, and instead you re-sign Kasperi Kapanen, who is an RFA. You re-sign him, and you give him some top 6 opportunity. With the loss of Malkin, although it will hurt, and I think it will only make the Penguins a worse team than they were before, giving more opportunity to some of your unproven talent like Kapanen or like Rodriguez, I think would benefit the team in the long term. Maybe even giving an opportunity to a young guy like Samuel Poulin or Philip Hollander or someone like that, maybe even Radim Sahorna. I think giving an opportunity to a younger player should be the way Pittsburgh should go if they end up losing Malkin. On the back end, if you're re-signing Chris Letang, you don't really need to change that much, honestly. Michael Matheson had a pretty good season for the Penguins, so I think you keep him around. John Marino is locked up long-term. That is a good contract. Brian Dumoulin will be on the last year of his deal, so you may want to look at giving him an extension if you really see it fit. Marcus Pettersson is still around for a few more years. Maybe you want to upgrade the bottom pairing right D spot, or maybe you're confident with a guy like Chad Ruhwedel, or maybe you give Joseph an opportunity, Pierre-Olivier Joseph, on that bottom pair. So I don't think much will change with the defense if they're keeping Chris Letang, but if he doesn't, that'll leave a big hole, and I think they will need to address that in the offseason by getting a top 4 defenseman, whether it's via trade or free agency. Depending on who it is, it doesn't matter. I think they will need to fill that void, whether it's with Chris Letang or someone else. And in the Pittsburgh Penguins net, Tristan Jarry will be the starter next season. No doubt about it. However, he is on the last year of his deal. So if the Penguins really want to keep Jarry around as their starter, I would consider giving him a extension, depending on how much money it is, how long it is, doesn't matter. He's a young goaltender. You could probably give him some term if you're really confident in him. And I think he'll make somewhere in the neighborhood of $4.5 million to $5 million bucks. I think he's been a good enough goaltender to deserve that kind of money. And then the backup position is very interesting, and I think there's some debate around that because you can go one of multiple different ways with this position. Casey DeSmith was a decent backup, and then he had core muscle surgery. This is the second time he's needed it in the last year. So a bit concerning in terms of how durable Casey DeSmith is. And let's be honest, when Tristan Jarry went down with injury and he was out for majority of the first round series, that kind of killed the Penguins' hopes of winning that series. And then especially when Louis Domingue had to come in. Although Louis Domingue played well, I think, and gave the Penguins a chance to win in every game, you don't want Louis Domingue as your starter in the playoffs. So I think what they should be doing is looking for someone that can split the net with Jarry. Maybe you give Jarry majority of the starts and you give the guy behind him maybe 30 games, 35 games. And I think you guys know where I'm going with this. I think you bring back Marc-Andre Fleury. He's talked about wanting to retire a Pittsburgh Penguin, and although I think he does like it in Minnesota, he'll give Minnesota a chance to re-sign him. I think the idea of having Fleury back in Pittsburgh for one last Cinderella run with Sidney Crosby and Chris Letang, I think that would be a great story. I'd give him a 1-year deal. I wouldn't give him that much term, and probably at about half the price that he was at this season. He made $7 million. Give him 3.5, something like that. I think that would be a good fit for Pittsburgh, because if this team wants to stay competitive, and I think as long as Sidney Crosby is on the team, this team will try to be competitive. You need a goaltender that you can have trust in if Jarry goes down in the playoffs. And although Jarry, I think, played decent in Game 7, you need a guy who has a bit of playoff experience. Why not go to a guy who won you a cup before in Marc-Andre Fleury? And then maybe you make a couple of smaller signings. Bringing back Danton Heinen as a depth piece would be nice. But those are the notable things that I see this team doing, which is honestly not that much. I think they already have a pretty good team even without Malkin in the lineup. So I think really keeping the band together and trying to go for it again next season with a relatively similar team, maybe a few changes here and there, maybe an upgrade to the goaltending position. I think this team can still come back next season and be competitive without Malkin. Letang may be a bit of a different story, but if they bring back Malkin and get rid of Letang, this team will still be competitive next year. But I think that's always going to be the goal. Sidney Crosby at his exit interview said he believes he has at least 3 more seasons left in him. Those are the years he has left on his contract. But I think as long as Sidney Crosby is a Pittsburgh Penguin, this team will act like they're competing for the Stanley Cup, because I think you owe it to Sidney Crosby with how much success he's brought the organization. I think you have to be competitive with him as long as he can be who Sidney Crosby is, which is a top 10 player in the league at least, and somebody who will drag your team through the playoffs. It's going to be an interesting offseason for the Pittsburgh Penguins. I'm looking forward to seeing what this team does, because depending on this offseason, they could either continue to compete, possibly extend their cup window, or Maybe Brian Burke and Ron Hextall view this team as not being able to get back to their 2016-2017 Stanley Cup championships, and maybe they need to step back. Look, this team hasn't won a series in the playoffs since, I believe, 2018, and they've struggled ever since, and they've continued to buy in to Crosby, Malkin, and Letang because they only have so much time with these guys on their roster, and now they've bought in again this year, and it still didn't work. Crosby, Malkin, and Letang are all older. Malkin and Letang are expiring. Maybe it's time for some overturn in the Pittsburgh Penguins organization with regards to who their core is. But let me know in the comment section below, what do you think the Pittsburgh Penguins should be doing this offseason? Do you think they should try to compete like they have in the past few years? Or do you think it's better for the team to possibly take a step back next season and maybe miss the playoffs, maybe pick up a pretty good prospect in the draft? And the most important question, who is more likely to remain a Pittsburgh Penguin? Is it Malkin or is it Letang? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new around here, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out.